Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. My name is Chooks, and with me in the house today is Stella Stephanie from UPH. Stella, would you like to introduce yourself? Give us a little bit about your background and what you do and your area of research.
Okay, hello Chuck. Hello everybody. I'm Stella Stefani. I'm a lecturer in Universitas Pelita Harapan, Indonesia. My expertise is online communication, is particularly in online education. And my research interest is currently is working around the inclusive education, particularly for higher education and digital literacy.
Excellent. So, talking about digital literacy today, we're looking at digital literacy as an enabler for effective design of authentic assessment. My very first question is: how do you define digital literacy, and why is that important, especially now that we've moved to more remote and hybrid learning mode? Perhaps describe what it means to be digitally literate.
Well, thank you, Jack. I'm gonna say that digital literacy is the ability of an individual to search for information, to evaluate that information, and to use the information, and to create a new information and disseminate it to the audiences through the digital media. So, um, currently, it becomes very important in this concurrent condition since every activity is conducted online, particularly in teaching and learning activities.
Excellent. Knowing that, like you've just mentioned, digital literacy is about identifying information, how you use the information. Who would you say is responsible for ensuring that educators and students are digitally literate, and who should champion this to ensure that perhaps we have digital literacy as a graduate attribute or graduate learning outcome after students graduate?
Okay, so who is responsible? Well, I'd like to say that everyone takes part in championing the digital literacy skill of each individuals. So not only for students but also for every element, specifically in higher education. While university leaders should consider about emerging the integrated and collaborative strategies among the stakeholders to improve the digital literacy competence. But I believe some education provider has put this as their graduate learning outcomes. Here in Universitas Pelita Harapan, we teach tech skill as a compulsory course for all students in their first year. However, I still do believe that each institution has its strategies to pursue the considerable impact by improving this skill among its member. So at the end of the day, I will just strongly encourage higher education to prepare their students before entering the real world life, while to compete with the peers to directly serve the community or in the industry just perhaps just a couple years from now, as well as educate their staff to improve their skill in using the technology in education.
All right. Thanks for your input on sharing about who's responsible for ensuring digital literacy in the universities, from educators to students. Um, are there any principles or frameworks that will support the understanding that digital literacy is important, and also support staff and students in enhancing their skills in terms of digital literacy?
Well, to be honest, I think digital literacy is a new thing. I do believe that UNESCO has provided the digital literacy global framework, which has been highlighted in SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 2030. Uh, if I'm not mistaken, it's in indicator 442, but it's back again for general purpose, not specifically for higher education. Well, correct me if I am wrong, again. Australian government, on behalf of Department of Education, Skills and Employment, has just launched its digital literacy skill framework in the last April 2020. Here in Indonesia, We also have such kind of national global framework provided by Cyberkreasi under the Ministry of Communication and Information. But again, those old frameworks are somewhat for general purpose. But basically, there are three common essential parts in these digital literacy frameworks. Those are, the first one is media and information literacy. The second one is content creation and computational literacy, and the third one is data and AI literacy. So I think we can just benchmarking to that areas.
Great. Um, Knowing that you just described the different frameworks that have been put in place to support digital literacy, would you say there is a that being digitally literate is a challenge for higher education, and why is that the case?
I'm just speaking on behalf of Indonesian context, okay? Of course, we have a huge challenge. The biggest one is we really have to face that the absence of national framework for implementing the digital literacy in higher education. And then we have a challenge in the uneven access for infrastructure since Indonesia is such a huge country. And last but not least, but I think it is quite important, is individuals and institution awareness of digital literacy. Those three things are challenges in implementing the digital literacy in higher education for Indonesia.
Great. So everyone knows that educational technologies have been known to support assessment design and its delivery. Now, when we look at digital literacy, how would you describe the role of digital literacy in enabling effective design and delivery of authentic assessments?
Well, I can say that an educator cannot develop an authentic assessment if they are not digital literate themselves. Authentic assessment encountered to stimulate the real working environment and enhancing the academic integrity and honesty among students. By saying the real working environment, I'll talk about the digital era where we live today. Digital literacy, I believe that will help both educators and students to wisely use computer hardware, software, as well as internet as a reference sources to produce such a quality outcome.
Mm. You do raise some really interesting points there in terms of the need for digital literacy and for academics themselves to be digitally literate to actually design authentic assessment. What would you say institutions are doing on their part to support academics in becoming digitally literate so that they can actually design more authentic assessments?
While the practical ones are establishing the institutional framework, then develop the continuous program, particularly for internal staff, and monitor and evaluate the outcomes, and finally integrate the achievement with the key performance indicators, just in case to stimulate the staff motivation. I think, yeah, those three things perhaps can help this institution.
Excellent. We've just been talking about authentic assessments, but we also know that with the pandemic, everything has moved to more remote assessments. Is there a need for digital literacy increasing with remote assessments, and what role does technology play in enhancing the development of digitally literate academics?
Yes, definitely yes. The emergence of digital literacy has gone up in this concurrent condition of teaching and learning. Some say it's remote learning, some use the term of hybrid learning, just to make it clear the context that we're talking about teaching and learning is there is a physical distance between teachers and students, and teaching and learning activities mediated by the communication technology. In the past, several digital literacy studies particularly focus on the students. However, when the pandemic came into our lives, we just realized that it turns out that teachers also need the training to improve their digital literacy competences. So yes, the need of digital literacy increasing.
All right, perfect. I think you already alluded to this when you talked about technology and in supporting academic integrity and authentic assessment. My question here is, does being digitally literate help to uphold academic integrity? And how does EdTech facilitate this process, if it does?
Wow. Mm, I will use the term of contemporary educators. They need to recognize that students have a bright backgrounds and experiences using digital technologies before entering this concurrent condition. This have led to development of home-based literacy practices that is used to navigate a burgeoning digital learning environment. Well, when teaching academic integrity in the classroom, we really have to ensure that students effectively internalize the ideas about appropriate discourse, plagiarism, citation, and fair use of information and ideas. If it is ignored, and students are simply required to adopt the foreign and exceedingly formalized scholarly literacy practices, there will be a resistance and misunderstandings. So these misunderstandings can easily lead to violation of academic integrity. It's a simple because the practices do not coincide with the practices that students are really familiar with. So, for instance, when the students build on their new media literacy skills by creating the videos for YouTube, they will probably exercise different ideas about fair use of source material and acknowledgement practices than those upheld in academic. However, as an educators, we should be able to bridge the gap between these everyday media practices and more academic expectation about integrity and appropriate discourse.
Right.
Well, for second question, the education technology can support educators, maybe by translating the policy, the protocols, the regulation into what I say LMS language, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
LMS language.
Yeah.
Well, it can stimulate the educators with the possible option of activities in designing and delivering authentic assessment. That's what I'm saying about.
Great. Very curious question. I know most times technology comes with a little bit of resistance, and you're an expert in this area. How would you say institutions of higher learning can support their staff in embracing technology and overall manage that change in as opposed manage the change to ensure that staff know, first of all, know the importance of digital literacy and why they need to adopt technology, but also support them to embrace technology to do the work they do.
Yeah, it's quite a challenging question. We're here taking a part in championing the change from the resistant educators. You call it resistant educators, right? We do believe to diffuse the technology for those who think technology is disrupting need both time and strategic plan. I'm not saying that pandemic is good to happen, but I'd like to say that pandemic play a significant role to enforce these resistance educators in using technology as the solution. So I think this momentum should be utilized by higher education institution mm, to face the new normal, perhaps by establishing the more flexible teaching and learning activities like hybrid learning, flipped classroom, and any other forms of online learning to make sure that the improvement of of educational technology is not stopped when the pandemic's over, but it has to be used in daily activities.
Mhm. So finally, do you think, in your experience, that edtech companies can support the adoption of educational technology in higher education, and how? If you could shed some light on that, that would be great.
Well, from the company's perspective, yeah, I'll say that perhaps the edtech companies can provide the digital literacy curriculum both for students and teachers. Since you're expert in technology, right? By creating the instrument to measure the digital literacy itself and integrate into your product so we can just use that in our LMS. That's my dream.
Oh well, that's a project we can take on board, and I think that's not a big of an ask. So with that said, I'd like to say a big thank you, Stella, for coming on today to discuss digital literacy and how it can support the enhancement and design of authentic assessment. You've shared so much from your experience and from the Indonesian context, which has been great. So thank you again, and hope to continue collaborating with you in other projects.
Sure. Thank you, Juk, for having me.